Howdy to everyone who is joining. Welcome to tonight's webinar where we're going to be talking about mental health resources at Texas A&M. We will get started here in just a few moments. And so we're going to give some folks a chance to join just because it's only 1 minute past 6. And so if y'all will just hold tight, we will get started in just another minute or two. All right, it looks like we have our group for tonight. I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of your days to meet with us and talk with us about mental health here at Texas A&M. My name is Alex Hirschberger, and I'm the manager of Parent and Family Programs here in the Department of Student Life at Texas A&M. A part of my role is that I oversee the parent and family engagement and communication with undergraduate students, family members here at A&M. So I'm super excited for you all to be here tonight. Joining me here today is Dr. Bettine. In just a few moments, I'll have her introduce herself and kind of turn everything over to her. I wanted to make a couple of notes is that we are doing this via Zoom webinar. And so just so you know that you might not have access to your camera or your microphone during today's webinar, but just know that you can use the chat function to chat with any of the hosts tonight, either myself, Dr. Bettine, or Corey, who is our marketing and communications coordinator within the New Student Family Programs office. And also know that you can always submit a question through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you click on the icon at the bottom, you can submit any questions. And throughout the presentation, as well as at the end of the presentation, we will have some time to go over those questions. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Bettine. Dr. Bettine is our Senior Director of Counseling and Mental Health Care within the University Health Services Department.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Alex, for such a warm welcome. And thank you all for taking some time out of your busy lives to think a bit about mental health and talk about something that's a part of not only my career, but something that's really important to me. So glad to be here with you all. I will be sharing a PowerPoint. My understanding is you'll be able to see both a little bit of video as well as the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now and then continue with the introduction. Right. So Alex, could you just confirm that you can see my cover slide there?
Yep,
Perfect.
You're good to go.
Wonderful. So I'm going to also just do a little bit of juggling screens here while I'm talking to you. And again, my name is Michelle Bettine. I am the Senior Director of Counseling and Mental Health Care within University Health Services. And for those of you who are new to University Health Services, we are a large organization that encompasses the counseling and mental health care team. We have a prevention and population health team, and we also have the medical team. So we are here to serve students and have lots of great resources. But we'll get into all of that a little bit later. I'm going to move on to our plan for today. So liking to give people a little bit of a heads up, we're going to talk more generally just about some mental health trends, particularly what we've been seeing with college students, not just at Texas A&M. We will also look at that, but also national trends. Part of the discussion today will be really to empower you all to be able to identify signs of distress, to have ideas about how to support students and what resources are available. And we will also talk a little bit about the importance of coping and self-care, both for ourselves and for the students that we are supporting, that we know and love. And then we'll have some Q&A time And my understanding that will come through the chat. So you are free to share questions throughout the presentation. Alex knows to kind of pop in if there's things that I need to be attending to sooner than when I get there, or to the Q&A part, that is. Right. So here we go, talking a little bit about trends. I'm gonna bump it around on some slides. There we go. So I want to talk about not just the trends right now, the most recent years. A lot of people think about and know that there were some changes to mental health patterns and trends during the pandemic and since the pandemic. But I'm going back even farther with this discussion and wanting to talk a little bit about these trends that started about a decade, even before the pandemic. And we've seen some of them continue with a little bit of tweaking that we'll talk about. But we have continued to see on college campuses more students with mental health diagnosis. So they're already coming to college with a DX is for diagnosis, a diagnosis of some kind of a mental health issue. More students are coming already prescribed medication for mental health issues. There's more students reporting trauma histories and more students with prior mental health treatment when they already arrive on college campuses. We also know that more students are presenting with more severe mental illness. So not just mild things like milder depression, anxiety, but also some pretty severe psychological issues. There's lots of theories about that. Some involve the improvements with psychotropic meds. That is probably a piece of it, but there likely are many, many other factors playing into that. We also know that more students are seeking mental health services when they're on college campuses. And of those students seeking services, we know there's an increase of threat to self characteristics, and to take that out of euphemism, that is a threat of harm, so self-injury, or even students who have had thoughts of suicide, of taking their own lives. So it is important for us to be thinking about this and again, wanting all of our students to be their best selves, wanting to be part of prevention and early interventions as much as possible. We also know that counseling services help students with their academics, so that most students do better when they are better, they're more well, their mental health is stabilized and positive, and counseling service can help with retention. Another trend that's kind of adjacent to student mental health, for the last decade or so, we've had a challenge with staff turnover and retention, and that being particularly the mental health staff on college campuses. We've done a lot of things, we're making progress on that, but just to note that while there's this increased demand, we've also had some challenge with staffing. So that together has created some challenges we've seen. Now, since the COVID pandemic, interestingly, we've seen a very slight reduction in that threat to self. And again, it's only been a few years, so we'll be watching that very closely. I don't even know if that reduction is statistically significant, but it's been a little bit of reduction. This may or may not be a surprise, is that since the pandemic, we saw an increase of social anxiety. And that little asterisk there just says that that is even today, even post-pandemic, at the highest 13-year trend. And some of the data that I'm getting here is from the Collegiate Center, or the Center for Collegiate Mental Health. There's also a National College Health Association. So some of the data is coming from these, particularly focused on college student mental health. So that is where this information is coming from. We also saw a big increase after the pandemic about academic distress. And so think about these students who had part of their high school at home, or even part of their college at home. Teachers and faculty were much more accommodating, and then we kind of came out of the pandemic, and I think there was some catching up on some missed academic opportunities and a returning to a little bit higher expectations. So we did see quite a bit of distress. We also saw more eating concerns and more family distress. And I could just imagine with, the pandemic, with many families working, living, eating, all in a shared space, and trying to make that all work, that it makes sense that there was some distress. Since a little bit farther out from the pandemic, we're seeing the academic distress starting to come down, eating concerns are starting to come down. We also have noticed a little bit of a reduction in binge drinking, and less concern about alcohol use. Meanwhile, marijuana use appears to be slightly higher. And again, these are national trends. These are not specific to Texas A&M yet. Just pausing to see if there was a chat there. And here is just pretty recent data. This is from 2023. So usually it's after the academic year ends. It takes a little bit of time to get the data together. But what's interesting about this National College Health Association data is that within the survey that they put out, they embed some other scales. So there's this Diner Flourishing scale, there's a UCLA scale around loneliness, there's a suicide screening scale. So here's some of the things that we're seeing right now. And important to start with this one is that 44% of students nationally are reporting that they're flourishing. So that is good news. Many students are doing really well. So we don't want to forget about the fact that many students are doing very well. Meanwhile, or at the same time, about almost 80%, so 79% of those students reported no or low psychological distress. So lots of students who are not saying that they're struggling with that in particular. On the other hand, about 21% are reporting serious psychological distress. So not any, but very serious psychological distress. I also find this interesting, and we have seen this increase since the pandemic, and it has continued a little bit as we're hearing more from students about loneliness. So on the 2023, or in that data, there was 51% of students that scored positive on this UCLA scale for loneliness. So something to be thinking about, perhaps checking in with your students, your family members who are students, to see how they're doing and how they're connecting and finding, especially at a big university like Texas A&M, how are they finding those groups, those communities, their own niche within this very large system. On the same data, there's a 26% positive suicide screening. So that's having some thoughts of suicide. And of the students in this data set, 2.3% of them reported a past suicide attempt. And while that's a low percentage, any suicide is too many in my estimation. And this is an area where we want to make sure we're talking with people, checking on people. We, as a University Health Service does a lot of work around prevention, awareness, early intervention. And family members can play a big part in this as well. And we'll get into some of those details as we move forward. And again, I'm not going to do all this data. I'm a little bit of a science nerd, so I like to put some data in there to support my more anecdotal and experiential information about serving colleges, just to back up. And I think I'll just do some summary here. And this is from the CCMH, the Center for Collegiate Mental Health. This is a 2023 survey, which included over 800 counseling centers. So data from clients. So that's important to say that these students are not just all the students. These are the students who are receiving mental health service. And we have seen these trends for many years now, that the top three things we hear from college students as their top concerns are anxiety, stress, depression. That has changed, that the order of them have changed a little bit over time, but it has remained those top three. I think another thing I'll point out is what was interesting to me is I did a very similar presentation in 2020. I think it was summer of 2020. So we didn't have data post pandemic, but going back and now these several years later, looking at how many of the things below those top three are related to relationships and interpersonal things. So some of the things like the trauma, the self-esteem concerns, the eating or body image concerns, those weren't as high before. Those have kind of creeped up in their prevalence. So just something to note and be aware of. And I think as I try to make sense of that as a mental health professional and as someone who hears a lot of stories from students, I think those years where students spent a lot of time on, again, in the pandemic, where they were on virtual relationships, on virtual learning for a while, I think that perhaps coupled with the social media culture, so the fact that many students are connecting with their peers through TikTok and all the different the apps and social media platforms, that it just changes kind of how we do relationships and the things that worry our students.
Dr. Bettine, we did have a question about, do you think there's a connection between suicide ideation with her? Is it more hereditary or is it more about social esteem through peers?
This is, the age-old question around many things, particularly mental health thing, is the question around how much does nurture and nature contribute to mental health challenges? And in my many years of experience, it is often a both and. And what I will say about suicide is that we know that there are factors that lead to that. So there are things that we can do. So even when there's a family history, we can intervene with suicide. We can help prevent suicide by managing some of what we call the drivers or the things that lead to suicide. So things like hopelessness, things like psychological press, things like not seeing another option. So I don't know if this fully answers your question. There have been some research that says there may be some genetic ties to suicide. I don't know that it's direct because we often see depression or certain psychological states that are associated with suicide. So there may be a genetic disposition for some of those psychological and mental health disorders. And again, there are many social and there is a piece about coping and resilience. So students who, and stress, right? So students who have a lot of stressors, a lot of challenges in their life and don't have enough resources or coping skills, or they perhaps have certain identities or don't have access to the things they need. All of that together can make a student more prone to suicidal ideation as an option. So feel free to ask follow-up questions. We will continue to talk about coping. We'll continue to talk about some of these trends. So I'm happy to, again, try to lean in. And as I'm both a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and a clinical social worker, and we often have a lot of depends. So there are a lot of factors we're thinking about. So we will try to give as clear of answers while also really being thoughtful and think about all the factors that can go into these very complicated things. So here's some notes about Texas A&M University, and just some notes and trends, and there's some similarities. So very much like the national trends, the top 3 presenting concerns for students at A&M coming to counseling and mental health care tend to be anxiety, stress, depression. And again, those orders can shift a little bit, but those top 3 are very common. Like national trends, so that I didn't have much more room to say more than that, but nationally, we're moving away from the amount of telehealth that we were doing a few years ago. However, here at A&M, we are even doing more in person than some of our other college counseling centers. So at this point, we are providing right around 90% of in person. That seems to be preferred generally. There is a little bit of telehealth, around 9 or 10% of telehealth that is preferred by students, and sometimes that's based on programming or scheduling. So it still is a convenient option that we lean into. Just want to name one trend that's different. So unlike many other centers, we aren't 5 miles within a hospital with crisis beds. So I know there's been discussion of trying to develop some crisis beds here within College Station and Bryan area, but we have to go much farther. So when students are in really imminent crisis and they need to be hospitalized, that's a bit more challenge in this community than other colleges. We also, when University Health Service became an organization, when we brought the counseling and the medical staff all together into this big organization, there was intentional movement to increase staff salaries and to increase our embedded team. So we've been wanting to make sure that we increase our reach and access for students, and that we really retain our staffs, that we are here to serve students. We've also, other ways we've tried to focus on accessing students and reaching out to where they are. We have increased our initial sessions and follow-up sessions. So that's that ongoing counseling where folks are actually working on the things that are challenges to them. And what we found is that some of our crisis appointments, those more drop-in appointments, have decreased a little bit, which is great because it means students are actually getting what they need rather than maybe there aren't the appointments available that they need, and then they have to come in through those crisis appointments. Meanwhile, the students we are seeing, there is more risk for suicide. So that is something that we are watching carefully and really intervening with students on as whenever possible, whenever they're coming to us, to make sure that that is no longer an option for them as much as possible. Another thing is collaborative care. So within University Health Services, there is a lot of great work within the health center. They have some mental health folks supporting right there in a collaborative care team. And then across the medical and counseling team, we're doing a lot more collaboration and referral, which really just gives good care to our students. And this is something that I want to note. I've been with Texas A&M a little bit over a year. And the thing that astonishes me, if not on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, is the care that staff have for this community. So the Aggie values are present in our work, the care for our Aggie students, the care for each other. It is a unique setting, and it is really amazing to behold how committed people are to each and every student. So even in this very large institution, each student that walks in the door is treated like they're the only person, right? So we make the room, we take the time to get each student what they need. And that is just amazing to be a part of. So I feel very blessed and honored to be a part of this team. And moving on for a little visual here, and this is a little bit older cartoon, but I kept it because I think it really captures what a lot of students feel like or tell us when they come to the counseling center, that lots of students feel like everyone else has it all together. They feel like they're the only ones struggling. And I think that social media is a part of this, and the tendency for our students to compare what they see as their messy inside. So and that's true for each of us, right? We know what's challenging, what struggles we all have on the inside. But when we're looking at social media, all we see is everyone else's beautiful, wonderful, what looks like perfect, shiny, fabulous lives. And what many students end up doing is comparing their very internal, messy experience to what seems like perfect or near perfect altogether experience of other people's social media exterior. So we all can help. I think we can name this. I think we can talk plainly about our own challenges. I think we can open spaces for our students to talk about the things that aren't wonderful. I think opening conversations about social media can be helpful. All of these things are things to consider as a parent. And I didn't say this in my intro, but I'm also the parent of a now graduate student. So we've had these conversations through undergrad programming and even through graduate school, just talking about how different it is to grow up in the world that is now. So it's a different experience than when I grew up, at least. And I think as parents, sometimes we can open that conversation and we can learn some pretty interesting things. So how does mental health impact students? So first of all, we know that students can experience distress for a lot of reasons, and having stress or distress does not mean that a student has a mental health disorder, and it may not even mean they have mental health symptoms. Nonetheless, when stress and distress endures, we often see it impacting students in many ways, or when the stress or distress is too high for the students coping. We see their social lives impacted, their academics impacted. It can impact, their families, how they interact with their families. It can impact finances, mental health. For students that have multiple roles, it can impact that juggling, their parenting or work demands outside of school. And again, I've referenced this a few times, but when students don't have the resources, and coping can be our internal coping skills, it sometimes can be access to support or access to transportation or access to caring others. There are many things that can be part of our coping system or coping skills. But if students don't have enough of those, that's when we tend to see the symptoms and the difficulty really meeting all the different demands. And that's when we tend to see students really showing up in a high level of distress and perhaps even showing some pretty serious mental health symptoms. And here, I just wanted to share this quote from a research article, and I do have references at the end that I will share with folks. But this one article said that the top 10 reasons for poor academic performance reported by students were almost all psychological. And we see that more often. We also see that And it looks like I just accidentally stopped screen sharing. So let me reshare and I'll get back to my thought about that. Share. Okay. So Alex, if you could do a thumbs up or just quick yes that you're seeing the impact of symptoms on student mental health.
Yes, you're doing great.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, now I'm going to get back to the thought that I was saying about how academic performance is connected to psychological factors. We're actually hearing this quite a lot here at Texas A&M and across the country from our colleagues in disability resource centers, that they are seeing more and more requests for accommodations related to mental health, and just mental health. And sometimes mental health is also a factor in addition to something like a learning disability or other things. So that has been a trend that's been shifting over time. Oops. So I have this slide here just as you all are parents, family members, you're related to someone, to a student. Curious for you to think about, what is your role? Do you have thoughts or beliefs? And you can kind of just think on your own. If there's something really pressing that you want to share in the chat, you can do that as well. But wanting you to think about what your role is, and then also to think about what's your level of comfort or discomfort in approaching your student about their distress or possible symptoms. Just looking at the chat. And I share, again, there may be time to talk about that later, but I wanted you all to think about that, because part of what I want to do today is stress how important it is, how important you all are. And students tell us that it really matters to them what their families, what their parents, what their loved ones think about them. They want to make you all proud. And I think sometimes that pressure, even if it's coming internally from the student and not from us as family members, for us to all remember that it really is true that we can be a rainbow in someone's cloud. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't take a lot to point out something nice, to be a listening ear, to say something positive, to really ask, how are you doing? You know, not just about, so many students get so focused on their performance and their grades and how their presentations or papers are going, that they don't always really think about, how are you? How am I as a student doing? And I think we can be that person to pause and check in and maybe share a little bit of care and grace to our students. And then going more specifically, here are some things that I think make you all a really important part of your students' success and well-being. You all know your students, your children, your family members, again, knowing there are probably multiple relationships of folks in this Zoom space, but you see the changes and you know when things are off. So you might be the first to really notice that something's different. And I think it's important to note that while students developmentally, it's their job, right, to launch, to really figure out their sense of themselves, their identity development. At the same time, so you can be the one they turn to. So even while they're in this new phase of life, or even if it's graduate school, they're now in this new part of college or that part of their career, we all can be part of the support system for these students. And I do think there's a beauty that if, as a family member, you don't see the student every single day, sometimes, so maybe you see a student when they take off, you know, for fall semester and then again at fall break, you might actually see something different. You might notice that they're just a little gloomier, or they're not smiling as much. And I said this already, but I want to reinforce that you all mean a lot, and what you think matters. You know, and I know family relationships can, there's lots of different relationships. They can be complicated. There can be lots of nuances to them. But in general, what you all think matters a lot. And we all as parents can acknowledge distress, and we can help with reducing the stigma. And we as I think a nation have done a great job. We as college campuses have done a great job helping reduce stigma, which is why more college students are feeling okay with reaching out, but we can continue as families to help work on that and help reduce the stigma. And I think the things that can be really helpful is being direct. And that's both in direct in your feedback, but also direct in helping students access resources. And I cannot tell you how many times students have come into the counseling center and either said that their mom or their dad or their older brother or sister, someone is the one that told them about the counseling center, or their parents were the ones that heard about TELUS, the mental health 24/7 app during orientation, and their parents told them about TELUS. And the reason I say this and why it's so important is that we know that when folks are in distress, they don't always have the energy, the whatever it might be, the motivation to look up the resources they need. Or when they do, sometimes it's too many clicks even for them to actually make that first appointment. So sometimes you might be the one that students are really hearing for the first time about resources, and your encouragement can help them get connected. I
Dr.
won't
Bateen,
spend, yeah,
I'm so
please.
sorry. I keep
Yeah,
interrupting you, so I apologize. But
no,
that last slide was very relevant to one of our questions, so I just thought
okay,
I would be timely with it. And
perfect.
so we had someone who asked, "How do you get your student to reach out if you think they need help, but the student might not think that they need that help?"
So patience is a part of that. I think knowing the resources is really important. I think sharing your concern directly, and I'll talk a little bit more about some direct language with this, but I think, and I'll do just a little bit here. So say you notice that your student is struggling, as much as you can say something really tangible. So I noticed you, this is just an example. I noticed you're not smiling as much as you used to before. Or I noticed that you're worrying a lot, and I'm hoping that you can get some support, and I wonder if you could find a place to do that. So I think, again, as family members, we can encourage. There is a balance though. So and I even know this now with my grad student child, that if I push too much on something, it might just lead to an absolute no. So coming at it over and over again, but then maybe inviting, well, what is it that you think you might need? Well, how do you think you're doing? So I think that's some other ways is really engaging students in their solutions. Testing out, do you think there's anything different with you, or do you think you're having some challenges, to really understand? And if a student's like, absolutely not, they probably are not ready for some intervention or to go seek help. I will talk a little bit more later, but we do have a tell somebody report process, so that if you're really worried about something and your student is not open to resources, that there are a team of folks within our student Department of Student Affairs or student life folks who can reach out to students and do wellness checks. Again, this is it should be more if there's really concerns, not just like, they're a little bit off. That may not be the best route. That I would start with a conversation. But again, I'll get back to the tell somebody reports. And Alex, if there's any other parts of that question or other questions, since while I'm doing questions, that we should jump into.
I think that's the only like necessarily relevant question, but we can kind of go back to questions at the end as well too.
That sounds great. That sounds great. And I really want to get to the Q&A part. I think that's really great to have it be a little bit more I want to lean into what's important to you all. But I will spend just a little bit of time. This feels really important for us all to think a little bit about, which is the difference between crisis and distress. And the reason I bring this up is that over the past while, some years, there are a couple words that seem to have been almost rendered meaningless. So we have crisis, we have mental health, and we have trauma. And I think these words are being used so broadly that they don't mean this, they don't have as much meaning because they're used so broadly. So I think it's pretty important for us to really think about what is a crisis, because to me, a crisis means that there should be immediate or very soon intervention. That means something needs to happen now. We do have lots of students, when they feel distressed, they feel like they must be seen today. And that it feels that way, right? Distress feels terrible, but it may not be, they may have to find things to do while they wait for an appointment. And there are many options. So we've got lots of resources. We're going to talk about all of them. So students know all of those options, and you all can help students get connected. But when I think about crisis, that is when there is a threat to self or others. So this is when there are thoughts of suicide or thoughts of seriously harming another person. So if this is in play and it is imminent, this is when we need to be still calling 911. So if this is imminent risk of harm to someone that we can intervene with, that's when we want to make sure we're activating those emergency services. Now, threats or thoughts of suicide, thoughts of harming others, that student should be connected. It may not, if it's not imminent, meaning like this is going to happen today, but they've been thinking about it, that really is a sign that I consider that a crisis. They should be gotten to our crisis services or to a mental health professional pretty quickly, or to support services, so that someone can one, do an assessment and do some early intervention, some safety planning and things like that with the student. Other things that are crisis, someone is really out of control. They're destroying things. They're really being unsafe. Or if there's psychotic or delusional symptoms where someone is really losing touch with reality, that means that we need some pretty quick intervention. If someone, this is another one we see sometimes, where a student is having a bit of a, they might call it a breakdown or a panic attack, but we're talking about a student who cannot calm or settle for an extended period of time. And we've occasionally get students that are brought to the counseling center where they're to the point of they are hyperventilating and it has been going on for the past 2 hours and they really can't settle. They need some intervention. They need help. That's crisis. And then again, if someone has incoherent speech or thoughts, this could be medical, this could be mental health, but we should get them assessed somewhere for those kind of symptoms. Meanwhile, distress and signs of distress, again, so severe distress, we need intervention pretty quickly. Mild distress, that's when we start thinking about coping and what are maybe some of the other options that don't necessarily mean a higher level of care or mental health intervention. But when you start seeing your notable changes in behavior or performance, so that's a student who worked out every 5 days a week and suddenly they're not doing it at all for a month, or a student who's in class every day getting A's and B's and suddenly they're skipping class half the time and they're getting some C's, D's, or F's. Those big changes say something is going on and it warrants a discussion and potentially some support. A couple other things, really extreme mood changes or reactivity, lots of depression or irritability. I'm not going to read every single one of these to you. Real high activity, so someone who's really activated with pressured speech, or that kind of withdrawn, so kind of shutting down, separating or distancing. And again, additionally, increased substance use can be an indication something's going on, and we can be checking in and starting to say, let's think about what supports we can get in place for you. Oops. All right, there we go. And again, we talked a little bit, but I think in some ways a little bit of repetition is helpful, but here's how I see you playing a key role. Again, many students are at a new developmental point, whether they're undergrad or grad students, but particularly those undergrad students, we can develop a new kind of version of relationship where we're both supporting them as this young adult who's kind of somewhat on their own, not fully on their own, but partially. And we can still be part of that support and safety net for them. And when we notice those signs of distress, we can share those observations. It always goes better if it's kind and direct. And I know some parents want to be very gentle, so they kind of, they're a little less direct. That isn't always effective. But when you have kindness and directness and share your concern in a non-judgmental kind of way, it often goes better. It's the best possible way to do that. I think that piece of just exploring like what's going on and really listening, not listening to have an answer at first, but really trying first to listen for what their understanding is, maybe even kind of paraphrasing to say, am I hearing you correctly, that you're really thinking things are going okay, but it's this one class that's a stressor for you. So trying to get really clear on how they see this and what might be going on with them. It's also great. We want to be part of their support system, but asking our students what are they seeing as their support system? Who are the people that they're able to turn to on campus, if any? and I'll share this quickly. I recently talked with a student and they were really good friends with all of their roommates, but they didn't feel like they could open up to the roommates. So I think it's important to really check that out and not assume just because they have really good friends that students always feel like they can open up to their friends here on campus. Self-care, I think it's important to check, do our students have intentional self-care in place? Are they doing things that help them be their best selves? Are they getting enough sleep? Are they doing the things that really help them manage the stress in their lives? You can again refer, or even this is where as a parent, you're kind of directing or offering, I heard about the counseling center on campus, or I heard about this TELUS app. Are you interested in doing that? Or even, so if they're open to it, looking for off-campus resource if that works better for your student and for your family situation. And then I think this checking back. So again, you can check, and if the student's really not open and you're not concerned about imminent safety at this point, maybe checking back a little bit more frequently. Hey, how's it going? How are things happening now, or what's new with you? You can also, and this is where I have that consultation. So at the counseling center, we have we call it an administrator of the day, where we at times get calls from parents where a parent just wants to talk through, I don't know what to do. Here's my concerns. Can you give me some recommendations? And we're able to do that. And that TSR, that's that tell somebody report. And we will make sure to, actually, I'm wondering, Alex, if you could drop that link in the chat, if you could look up the Tell Somebody report page. Parents, you can also, and family members, if you go to Texas A&M site or just go to Google and do TAMU and do Tell Somebody report, it will bring you right to the page where you can fill in some information. Thank you very much. I see that both the TELUS app is now in the chat and the Tell Somebody report page is in there. And it really directs you on what kinds of things are reportable. You can do that with your name. You can do that anonymously. And then you all likely have supports, and that could be other parents. It could be family members. It could be your faith leaders. Also use your supports to kind of talk about and consult on what's going on if you have concerns, and help get ideas about how to get support to your student. For time's sake, because I really want to get to Q&A, I'm not going to share this video. This is a little YouTube. It's a little bit older. The reason I put this in here is I have to remember sometimes that just words or emails or phone calls aren't always the best way to get a message to my college student. But finding things like this, so little tidbits on YouTube, or maybe even better on TikTok or Instagram, maybe vet it though, because not all of them are great, but there are some good tidbits that sometimes sending a message of you care. And like this little YouTube video really normalizes that actually everyone has mental health. There's good mental health and poor mental health, but we all have it. So it does a nice job of just saying, going to a counselor, it doesn't have to be problematic. It's good for all of us to attend to our mental health. And I'm realizing, let me see here. There we go. I dropped my mouse, but I can use my arrows, so keys. So I think we're good. So I will do a quick pause. Alex, you can jump in if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to go to some warning signs. We only have a few more slides, and then we'll be to the Q&A portion.
I think that works. So if you want to kind of wrap up, we can get to the Q&A
Perfect.
session. And there's a couple of questions we can move on to too.
Perfect. That sounds great. So I'm broadening this a little bit to kind of well-being, and because mental health is part of our overall well-being, I'm going to put some warning signs. We've talked about some of these already, but these are the things that we often see first when we are aware of students that are struggling. There's a lot of fear and worry. That can be a warning sign, particularly when the fear and worry is starting to interfere with functioning. It doesn't go away. It's interfering with sleep. It's just becoming too big of a part of someone's life. Another warning sign is changes in sleeping or eating. So many of us respond to stress by doing more or less of these, of sleeping or eating. We also know that when people struggle to sleep or struggle to concentrate, that can be, there's lots of reasons, but it could be a warning sign that something just isn't quite right. When folks start having more health issues, pain, like headaches or stomach aches, It could be a sign that there's something going on that's just really manifesting in a little bit more physical way. When we see more mental health symptoms, so more anxiety, more depression, more kind of ruminating or obsessing about things, that could be a sign that something just isn't as going as well as it can. And then again, that increased use of substances can be an indication that someone might be trying to self-medicate or trying to manage things by that use of substances. And I won't spend a ton of time on this, but just introducing the concept of a wellness wheel. You have likely seen this. There's probably thousands of these wellness wheels, and they all have, well, many of them have different domains here, but just to bring to the forefront the fact that well-being often involves a balance amongst many domains of functioning. Sorry, I skipped forward. What we see in students, though, is that oftentimes the aspects, for example, the intellectual and occupational aspects of their being are getting all of their attention. So all of their energy is going into studying, thinking about their career, doing all the things in those domains. Meanwhile, they may not be attending to their body and getting good exercise or movement. They may not be attending to emotions or their relationships or their spiritual life. So whenever there's imbalance, there's a better chance that there's going to be impacts on well-being. On the converse, there are times students come and they're really focusing on their social life. And again, that's going to have impact. So that is also an imbalance. And then we may see that their academics or other things are impacted negatively by that. So also a way to kind of talk with students about well-being more kind of holistically. And here's some things, I'm going to say it to you. You probably know this. You can share this with students, but these kind of things are important for our students to take care of their emotional health. That is important. And many students, that is the first thing to go is self-care or taking care of their mental health. Students do not love to hear this, but taking break from news and social media can really improve their mental health. There's a lot of research starting to come out on the correlation between social media usage and well-being. So gently having those conversations within our family. And I talk a lot with students about I call it the basics. So the sleeping, eating, exercise, even things like breathing, and being careful with what you're putting in your body. That is all foundational, the basic parts of well-being, so we can manage that. We want to make sure our students are making time to unwind, again, to soothe, and not just unwinding by Netflix binges or social media, but really other ways that they can be relaxing and unwinding. And then making sure they have time to connect with others and that they have connections with community groups. And that could be student groups, that could be faith organizations, but making sure students have connections and outlets. I will ask Alex to go ahead and put this in the chat too. This will bring you right to the University Health Service mental health resources. This webpage has many things, including on-campus resources. It has access to information about that TELUS app. There's many group programming. We've got lots of great workshops and groups. So just wanting you all to have access to that. And then a quick overview, and then there may be some more questions about this, but University Health Services, again, this broader organization that includes the counseling and mental health care. Our primary location is the Student Services Building, but we have 12 embedded counselors across campus and even at some of our other locations. Our primary medical and specialty medical care staff are largely located in the Butyl building. We do have crisis services, and that is largely at the Student Services Building. We also offer this is a great way for students, and this is on that mental health page, a great way for students who really aren't sure about counseling, but maybe will take that first step. So we offer what's called Let's Talk. It's not considered counseling or therapy, but it's a consultation space where student can kind of drop in and they can ask a question, or maybe they want support around a more, we hear things like, I want to change my major and I don't know what to do. It's kind of just a consultation space, but it's a good place. Lots of students come there when they want to kind of test us out to see if they're willing to try counseling. And then I already mentioned lots of groups and workshop, and this TELUS This is the Texas A&M system has provided access to TELUS. It's a 24/7 resource. There's a peer support network through the app. There is 24/7 phone or text support. So for crisis or when students are in distress, students can also schedule virtual appointments, so counseling appointments. There are in some bigger cities, so if you happen to have students in some larger cities, there may be in-person sessions there when students are home. It also has lots of like downloads and like breathing exercises. So it's a great thing to have students download when they're not in distress. So they have that access right away because it does take a minute to download it. And when folks are in stress, they don't love taking that time. And I think we are now to the part of, first of all, thank you all for being here. Your present means you care about this, that you're wanting to support your students. Thank you for being a part of that solution, being part of this movement to ensure that we're all doing better and taking care of each other. And I would love to lean into questions, but I'm first going to bend down and grab my mouse. So Alex, if you want to come in, I'll be right now.
Yeah, of course. Dr. Patine, thank you so much for your time tonight and your expertise and kind of talking through, especially I think from the parent and family lens, because I think that, as you know, that parent and family members are often large supporters in their student success. I will say that there's multiple questions that are kind of talking about this feeling of how to build community and getting outside, like how you're getting students outside of their shell and interactive social situations, or if their student is introverted and how you get them open to talking about their mental health status. And so can you kind of talk about how you can, how a parent or family member can help support or give resources that Texas A&M provides to enhance a student's communication and kind of help get them out of their shell and talking about some of these important topics?
Right. I think I'm going to split this maybe into two pieces and then try to hopefully cover both of these. But what I heard in there was the question about connection. And yes, yes, yes. We have learned more and more over time the importance of connection for student well-being. And so I'm a little bit of a science nerd. There's all kinds of actually kind of biopsychological pieces, physiological pieces around connection that we've learned, that we know that connections are protective factors and help students manage stress, distress, and the impacts of that on their nervous system. So connection is very valuable. We also know this is a huge university, and I've met so many alumni since moving to this area. And some of these alumni are many years past college. And the one thing that I hear from almost every alumni I've spoken to is they talk about how important it was for them to get connected. And this is even before it got as big as we are now. But each one of them has a story, and probably because I'm a therapist, I also ask about like, where did you get connected? But they'll share what group or what community or what thing they got connected to. And in my opinion, there's no right or wrong. There's many student organizations, there's many volunteer and service organizations. Some students really focus through academics, so they're kind of academic communities. Other students get connected through intramurals. Some students do get connected through counseling groups. So we have some really great groups that are about relationship building and coping skills. So that is a way some students get connected. And then all the different student affairs and student service programming. So based on students' interest areas or kind of where they're coming from, all I want to say is, well, one of the things I want to say is there is no end to the opportunities. So supporting your students in getting connected is great. The other piece of that is the fact that it can be hard and it can be challenging, particularly if you have a student that feels shy or overwhelmed by getting connected. And I think just talking through with them, what are the things that they're willing to try, and perhaps even looking together with some of, again, looking through the website or through even on their phone, it might be on your phone, where you're looking at all the options that are available. And again, knowing that there's options, knowing that that students can enter many doors to those different organizations. So I wonder if there's any more to that question, because I think support goes into that. I think knowing the resources, and then again, just continuing to encourage your student to get connected.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of that. And I know that Dr. Patine talked about this, but I will say that as a person who works in student life, if you ever don't know where to start, feel free to start with our Department of Student Life, and we can make sure that your student at least has an appointment with our Student Assistance Services team, and they can kind of talk through ways to get connected as well. Because our Student Assistance Services team is really an awesome aspect of student life, and they're huge in being able to help students get connected throughout the Division of Student Affairs, but also to the various resources that University Health Services provides. So speaking of that and speaking about getting an appointment, Dr. Patine, we have a question about, so for one, I think it'd be helpful to go over like what is the process to get an appointment through mental health services at Texas A&M, but also kind of that average wait time and some of those other pieces.
Great. And first of all, Alex, thank you. I was hoping you'd jump in and talk about student assistance services, and hopefully can share that in the chat as well. That is the team. So student affairs are the folks that are all about everything outside of the classroom. So that is their life. They are the ones who make sure that students and their experiences are broader and full. So thank you for sharing that. That's a wonderful team. We actually work very closely with student affairs and do lots of collaboration too when students come to us, and back and forth. We refer back and forth. The question about wait times and getting connected. So the best way for students there's lots of options. So students can always walk into our center. They can walk into the medical center. They can at Butyl. They can walk into the counseling center at Student Services Building, and they can make an appointment with the person at the front desk. They could also call and make an appointment. And I'm smiling because I know that is not how most students tend to want to do it. They want to use their phone. So that is really where our appointment portal is through our website. And if you go to Texas A&M University Health Services, there's multiple ways. It'll say patient portal on the side. It will also say mental health appointments and direct you to the mental health appointments or medical, where it'll all get you to the same point, where once a student enters their UIN, their student ID number, they will have access. They'll answer a couple questions of what kind of appointment they want, and they can get scheduled. We offer such a wide range of appointments. So sometimes students will say that they can't get an appointment for weeks. That usually means that they can't find the kind of appointment they want at a time that works for their schedule. However, if they're willing to be flexible and think of all the options, we can see most students same day or next day. And again, if there is a crisis, so we have a team that includes a couple crisis counselors and then back up with the rest of our team, that if a student is in crisis, they can come to the Student Services Building and they will get supported that day. So that is always available. We do anxiety appointments, quick check appointments, and then we do those initial appointments, which are for students who say, I really want to start counseling. So they want to kind of go through that initial kind of assessment process. At this point, we are scheduling out, have this data, I'm just trying to quick pull it up. It is actually much quicker than the community. I think last week we were at about, on average, it was about 5 or 6 days out. And I think we're really close to that right now. I cannot pull up that data with all the Zoom stuff happening on my screen, but I will say it's approximately a week, give or take. And that is so that's just the average wait time. But I do know that there are appointments tomorrow and the next day that are still available. So, and those are those ongoing appointments.
I think that's really helpful. I will also say we have a question in the chat that kind of feeds into this question. Most of the folks that are joining us here today are parent and family members. And so we had a question in the chat that is related to kind of some of that access and follow-up. Specifically, a family member asked they had called it the receptionist at UHS, and then they didn't hear a follow-up after their student had met with a therapist. And so kind of talking about some of that parent and family access and how that may or may not happen.
So I think this is what the question is about, but I think this has to do with just Texas state law, and it's pretty common across many states within the United States that we as licensed mental health professionals have to both follow the state mental health laws and code. There's laws and codes as well as our ethics codes. And once a student becomes an adult, so once they're 18, we have to follow the laws around privacy so that unless a student explicitly gives written permission, so it's an informed consent process where they give permission to share information with family members, we are not able to do that. So I don't know if there's more to that question. However,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was very confusing in asking that, so I do apologize. I think that I think what you're answering is basically kind of what the question is I know that there are federal laws that are not maybe allowing Texas A&M or University Health Services to release certain information. I can speak to FERPA. I don't know if I can speak to some of the like HIPAA and some of those other pieces. But there is some information about FERPA through the family portal, and I can help send that out sometime in the next few weeks to our parent and family members. But FERPA's basically protects all of our students. It's a Federal Education Privacy Act. And so a lot of the things that your student does at the university is protected by FERPA. And so sometimes it's going to be that the university is not able to openly communicate without prior permission from the student. And so a lot of that pertains to things such as their student bills and kind of anything that can be considered an educational record. So I know FERPA plays partly into some of the access within University Health Services, but I also know that there are medical laws as well that are impacting some of that access. And so Dr. Bettine, I don't know if you have anything to add related to some kind like the parent and family access side of things, if it's possible to request access, or if it's just kind of like there is no such thing as kind of that family access to some student data within University Health Services.
So yes, I can share a little bit more, and then I will also, if you really have questions, so I am not an attorney, I am a mental health professional, so I know the laws related to my practice. And I also know, because I've worked in different states and at different universities, is that it's a little bit different in every state and every institution on how they kind of manage this. So just to even further nuance this, there is FERPA student records, and that is where grades and many of the things that Alex was talking about is part of the FERPA student education record. And then there's FERPA, the parts of FERPA that cover the medical records. And we're actually covered under the FERPA medical records, which parallels HIPAA, but we are not considered HIPAA. Our emergency medical services is covered by HIPAA. There's all kinds of reasons why an organization and the laws direct us to do that, but very, very similar to other medical records, we have to follow the procedures. And again, it's under the FERPA laws for medical records that we practice.
Thank you. And I apologize for getting some of that stuff mixed up. I am also not an attorney, surprisingly enough. And so I kind of understand a very base level of some of those different pieces. I know that we're not going to be able to get to all of our questions. We're starting to kind of run out of time. I did really like the idea of ending on this one question, though. And so the question is, how do you reinforce the idea of holistic health and remind students frequently to take care of mental health as that it's essential to their academic success and overall well-being?
I think there's lots of ways to approach this, and you all know your students, your children, your family members better than I do. So they're all different, right? So I think it's knowing what works for them. And I think that sometimes, like I kind of alluded to before, talking is a great start. So talking to someone, but words alone aren't the best. And I know can be a challenge, but I think sometimes leading by example or inviting our children, our students to go with us to a well-being activity. And again, in the broadest sense, that could be well-being, could be going to the gym together or going to an art class together or making sure they're coming to church with you if that's what you practice within your family. So I think example is important. I think offering it, ideas. And then asking those questions, like what is your student willing to do? And how are they able to, because this is often with students, they feel like they don't have enough time for everything already. So asking them to add something else feels like a challenge. So I think just problem solving and trying to think about, well, how do they fit in things that will support their well-being into things they're already doing? You know,
Yeah, I know. And for me, I think the wellness wheel is all like so key of just making sure that all of those things are in balance. And so making sure that like your student is aware of the wellness wheel, I think can be a good starter as well.
I think
Dr.
that's great.
I'm so sorry for interrupting you. Yeah, I think the wellness wheel is awesome. I think it really helps understand that. I think sometimes whenever we think about well-being, we tend to just kind of immediately go to like that mental health well-being. But in reality, there's so many different pieces to having a good well-being. And so I think that wellness wheel does a really good job of explaining that. All right, y'all. So we are unfortunately out of time. I added some information into the chat just so there's some follow-up and contact information. But just know that if you have any additional questions, feel free to email us at familyprograms@tamu.edu. And we can work to get that answer to your question, and then we'll respond to y'all. So again, it's at familyprograms@tamu.edu. I've also added it into the chat so that way you are able to click that link and you can send us an email. Before closing out today's webinar, I did want to give a huge shout out to Dr. Bettine for joining us here tonight on this Tuesday evening. And I do really appreciate, Dr. Bettine, I really appreciate your time in working with University Health Services. I think y'all have been and are a huge resource to our students. And so we love being able to highlight you all as a resource to parent and family members. All right, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and end the chat or end the live stream, and we're going to end the recording. But